Initiation rituals have prevailed throughout the history of mankind, and in many African communities this rite of passage plays a very important role in an individual's life. The practice offers a transition from boyhood to becoming a man, and it's during this period that boys are often exposed to communities' customs and traditions, but so very often the transition into manhood has become synonymous with death, pain, in some cases even torture here in South Africa. Now, from our Cape Town studios, we are joined by Professor Kopano Ratele, an expert in violent masculinity. Professor Kopano, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you for having me, Eben.
Masculinity is always at the forefront of our problems in South Africa, isn't it, Professor? But I want to talk about the cultural dynamic around the initiation schools and the deaths that we're seeing. When we look at culture, when we talk culture, culture is quite a dynamic and living thing. Surely we can find a balance to curb the deaths of young men in South Africa.
Do you know, when I've been listening to this morning's interviews, but also thinking about this and reading in the newspapers, the phrase Black Lives Matter has come into my mind. Men's lives matter, just like women's lives matter. And if they matter, 30 deaths from what is supposed to be a wonderful experience, an experience that marks one's transition from being a boy to a man, this is unacceptable. I mean, basically, you know, the question that been asked is this relevant? Does this mean culture is static? The answer to the first question is of course, we're always being initiated in one way or another. Education, I mean, Western education or education as we have it in our schools, is nothing if it's not initiation. 12 years of initiation, 16 years in some cases when you start with play school, and then you still have to go to varsity. Education is about initiating people in particular ways of thinking. So, initiation schools about that, about initiating men into particular kinds of masculinities. So this is always necessary. But death is not necessary.
Why in South Africa do we always seem to have a connection between violence and masculinity?
It's a long, long history, and it's a history that's not gone by. It's very much present today. It's because of a host of reasons, including, you know, a militaristic culture. It's about our histories of violence under the national liberation struggle, yes, but also certainly under apartheid and colonialism. It's about fractured communities, about families that don't have role models who model peaceful masculinities. It's about drugs, it's about inequality, it's about poverty. So it's a whole lot of reasons working at different levels. Level one, of course, if you're studying with the psychologies of this. So some people can't control their impulses, they've not learned to emotionally regulate, as you say. And then right up at the top, you have policies that always consistently indicate that violence is not an acceptable way of handling solutions and conflicts. But clearly you live in a world where a number of countries, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, a number of reasons all over the world where you see that violence is seen as a way of resolving political problems, but also interpersonal problems.
At these initiation schools, we always hear stories of abuse, some of them even torture. If this is the process that takes you into manhood, are we breeding men that accept that they have to go into the world with a violent outlook?
Well, there are two parts to your question. One is, look, I mean, in any particular structure or system like this, where you're trying to initiate men, you'll find hustlers, two-timers, pimps, all kinds of characters that do not and cannot be entrusted with initiating young men into manhood. So you have that. Illegal schools, people who will torture, because they don't know what they're doing. All they need is to be paid at the end of the day. They need money. So you have to deal with that. You have to deal with that. But by the way, before I continue, I have to say this is this particular program this morning is fantastic because you need spaces like this. You need spaces like this where you bring doctors, initiates, people who run schools, and people like me who will comment on that from a perspective of masculinity or violence. So you need to speak and deal with people who are hustling because they want money and they have no good reason to be close to young men. So that's the one particular reason we have to underline this, and then you have to move forward. How then do you begin to make the schools what they initially intended to be, which is to mark a moment in young men's lives into adult masculinities.
Professor, I don't want to be controversial for the sake of being it, but I think we've had part of this discussion going forward. If you can hear me, isn't it time for us to structure the process of becoming a man in South Africa a little bit better, and maybe even opening it to other races? I think it's a wonderful way to build trust and understanding.
Yes, I agree. I think we spoke about this previously, and we have said this. And earlier on, we were speaking about this particular reason. I mean, there are things that have to remain secret. As I said, I always say that there's a good reason to have secrets. Families have secrets. If you didn't have secrets in the world will not function well. I've said this before. But here is this thing that can be beautiful. And I have had experiences from men, Xhosa men from Bapedi, Basotho men, I'm Sotho myself, who have gone through this practice. Although I have not gone through this practice myself, because I think somehow I don't want to put my life in the hands of people who don't know anything about masculinity, who don't know to reconcile the old ideals of bringing boys into manhood with the present ideals that are contained in our constitution. And part of what you're asking is, can this be used as a moment where you could bring different groups, different cultures to learn from these cultures where this practice is experienced and is engaged? Yes, I think so. I think not only people who are non-Xhosa, but also people who are non-black can be brought into the embrace of this culture. Because if you get a good teacher, if you get a man who has thought about this, and I've been reading about some men who are also working with doctors, who have been doing this for scores of years. So an 89-year-old man who has never lost a life. You need that man. You need to know what they do. And if I could have a chance to learn, even at this age, from a man like that, I'll be a better man for it. So you need men like this. But I should say this again. But the question is, can you bring these the practices, the learnings that you have in initiation schools into a conversation with the constitutional ideals, such as, I mean, fundamentally you have this thing about equality. Equality is an important ideal in our country, and you need to bring equality into conversations with what is taught in these schools.
Thank you, Prof. We've run out of time. It looks like you've run out of your hearing aid there as well. But always fantastic to talk to you about this. I think we need to change the way we think about what makes us South African within the wider context and so forth. Thank you as always for joining us. That's Professor Kopano Ratele. We're talking about, of course, we were talking about the rite of passage, masculinity, violence.